so great to be here this morning with Francisco in his painting, inside his painting at the DMA, and just a treat to be here and able to talk with the artist and UTA alum about his piece, about the generation of it, the production of it, and so forth. And while we're in here, it's just an amazing place to be, all encompassed in a painting. And maybe we start with just talking about the chapel. Tell me about the chapel.
So yeah, the chapel is an all-encompassing painting structure inspired by a Spanish Romanesque chapel I saw in Spain in 2016. I loved the experience, and when I saw it, I saw the original chapel in Spain, I knew I wanted to take this format and see how it would apply to our kind of contemporary world. I had never experienced anything like that before, so I had my little, so I was at the Prado in Spain. I had my little pamphlet and I had my pen, and I measured the chapel, the Hermitage of La Veracruz de Madurero. I measured it with my feet and wrote down the dimensions.
Now this had to be so encompassing, I couldn't imagine. How long did this take?
So it was since I had the idea, since I made the Google SketchUp mock-up in 2016, it was then a year of me getting my ducks in a row to figure out how to make it, and then a year of painting. So 2 years. 2 years of me being in here laboring, and then, 1 year of me being in here laboring with a year before it of planning and figuring out.
I look around and I see so many art historical and contemporary references. Let's jump into that and maybe tell me about some of the inspirations or references, and maybe what you were thinking as you were creating this piece, as you were inside.
As an artist, you end up as a painter. In my case, I am very influenced by visual culture, and part of visual culture is painting history, right? So having studied painting, you become really interested in the history of kind of that focus. So I loved looking back through time and seeing how painting has existed, and how it still seems somewhat relevant, and it became a really interesting experience to pull from so many different visual elements and see how they would exist together. I think what's really fascinating about being a painter today is that you can get on the internet, and I mean, even like Google Arts and Culture, a lot of museums put their collections online, right? So back when Velázquez was learning to paint in Spain, he only really had the royal collection to look at. Now we can look at everything, right? So how do we process all this information? I mean, it's kind of overwhelming, but it's also incredibly fascinating. We have such an amazing access to so much history nowadays in our phones. That was definitely inspirational to what I wanted to explore in the chapel.
And you see, obviously, I think things from The Last Judgment in there, is that? And some Aztec or Mayan figurines. Is that, are you thinking about your Latino heritage at any point when you're painting some of these things? And how much does that come into your work, or how conscious of you?
I think what's fascinating is that, I was born in Mexico, grew up here, would often go back. So something that I really want to communicate in the work is this kind of sense of being transnational, or aware that it's not just one culture centric. I think when I grew up, I kind of came of age here in DFW. So I remember feeling like a true culture. I don't know another way to explain it, but there's so many different elements, and all these elements kind of are a culmination of a culture or a heritage, and I feel like it has to have everything for it to feel authentic and for it to feel pure, because my experience is that of everything, from like Mesoamerican to Eurocentric to European inspiration.
Take me back to when you were creating this, and how much, obviously, you had to do a lot of planning. But maybe I wanted to start in that with the imagery and how you maybe curated it down to this, what the thought processes were as you were painting it, you know?
I fell in love with the space in Spain, and I wanted to build a structure and paint inside of it. So it was pretty much a three-dimensional canvas, right? I didn't really know what was gonna go inside, and that was a purposeful decision because I had done a large project in 2015 called the WCD project, which was kind of a reimagination of Washington crossing the Delaware, and I mocked that project up in Photoshop, and I pretty much just executed that project, and at that point I felt almost like a machine because I just projected the image and I painted. So when I started working on this project, I really wanted it to develop naturally and organically. I wanted to respond to the images as they were coming about, which made it a little bit more difficult because you don't really have a strict plan to work off of, but it felt more pure because, you know, you'd paint an image and then, you know, you'd experience something that day and you'd come back the next day and you'd think, oh, I was going to put this thing here, but no, actually I'm going to do this, this other element seems more true to how I feel, you know? I mean, so I guess the intention was like, I know what I want to do, but I still had a amount of space for improvisation, and for intuition to come into play, because it's a balance of both.
Right. I see a lot of like repeated patterns and marks, and I know in the documentary that you produced about the making of this, you had a reference to Alebrijes.
Yes.
And I got really interested in Alebrijes when I went to Oaxaca for my first time and met the Angeles, and was just blown away by the intricate details and symbols and patterns that go into that. Now, you were inspired, or that kind of drove you to make some of these things. Maybe talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, alebrijes are kind of like these little wooden sculptures made by artists in Mexico. I think they started early 1900s, and they're I think it's maybe, I'm not going to say the name because I'm going to get it wrong, but this guy had this vision of this mysterious monster, and he's like woke up and carved it, and then he painted, and then he just like with his very tiny brush painted these intricate patterns. And I think what I loved about it was the idea, the notion of the artist working on these objects, and like it was a way for me to really appreciate kind of the production of painting. Like when we'd go to Mexico, you see these artists making these alebrijes, and I think it's such a beautiful thing. And I was like, how do you communicate that like in a way that's not that's kind of like my own interpretation of it. And what I wanted you to come in, when you walked into this space, I was in love with the idea that you could kind of look at the painting and then you could see like these little brush marks. So like everything we see behind us was, the final layer was painted with a tiny, zero round brush. So, I mean, for all of you visiting, I recommend you come in and look at it closely, because it wasn't something that was painted quickly or gesturally. It was something that was very kind of time-consuming and a labor of love.
Now, when you finally finished that last brush mark, was it a feeling of satisfaction? What was the feeling that you had when you completed something of this scale?
Yeah, it felt pretty good.
Oh, what's next?
It felt good. I think this project was a leap of faith, and I mean, there were times when I was working on it where I questioned my sanity, like, why am I doing this? I guess I'm very fortunate that I had a lot of great support throughout the way, met a lot of great people, and that's something really fascinating about these projects, is that they end up being so big that you really can't do everything yourself. You do have to reach out to people to help you. I mean, I had really great friends who are architects, David Dross and Lance Rainey, that kind of helped me figure out some structural components. They introduced me to a lighting designer, Jill Clores, who is an amazing person, and helped me figure out the best way to light this piece. I worked with a craftsman, Seth Lorenz, who helped me I could not build this beautiful arrow slit window. I designed it, but I couldn't build it. So you begin to really outsource certain parts, and when you're working on something this large.
You know, I'm thinking about the fresco that you must have seen in the Prado. And we typically see these frescoes richly painted. And we're looking at yours, and there's a little bit of color, but it's mostly black, white, and gray.
When I was working, like I knew I wanted there to be a color component to the way that you experience the work, but I also knew that figuring out the color, because the color is a very complicated thing, to figure out the color would have been just, I don't think I could have done it in the time that I had. So my strategy was to lay a foundation of color. So the first layer is, it was all like the first layer of the chapel was almost this huge abstract painting. So if you look behind a lot of the symmetry, you see these fields of color, which I would then like kind of clear coat and then paint on top of. And I think something that the lights do that we haven't really talked about, these lights are really beautiful LEDs. They pull kind of the color from the back and bring it forward. Mm-hmm. But that was a very like, you know, like I think when I was working on this project, it's like, okay, what are my parameters? These are my parameters. This is what I'm going to work with. Right. You know.
And I think that that's what this does that's different than your standard painting on a wall, that it is really immersive when you come in here and are just kind of hit with all of this imagery from ancient art to the present day. And it's really just amazing, because I think about, well, how do you make painting three-dimensional? How do you take it out into space? And I think you've really done this in a way that I wouldn't have considered looking back to art history and being moved by that particular experience. I can't help, you know, I'm positioned here to see this middle finger with the bald eagle perched on top.
So the middle finger was something of one of the first things I painted in the chapel, and it was one of the first things because I feel like it freed me up to paint whatever. I wanted something that I've struggled with, is kind of like, oh, and a lot of artist friends as well, like you feel like you're holding back, like, oh, like people aren't gonna like this, or gallery's not gonna like this, or like curators aren't gonna like this, or my friends aren't gonna like this. And then I didn't want to have that weight with the chapel. And you know, a chapel is the religious structure. So by painting that middle finger, that was like one of the first things I painted, that middle finger, and I wanted it to have that honesty and that sincerity and the humor. Like like there's a monster truck flying through the air. Like the humor is also a very huge component to like this project, right?
I guess lastly, what I'm interested, you know, what's next for you? What's the next big project? Because you seem to move from one to the next, and I have to think that you've got something moving around that headspace.
Right now, I'm making tiny paintings. That's what's keeping me interesting, and that's what's keeping me interested. But for the future, I would like to build another chapel. So that's all I'll say about that. It'll be a little bit bigger than this one.
Well, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
We can't wait to see it, so we'll have to stay tuned.
Excellent.
All right.